So, good afternoon, everybody. Probably going to take a slightly different approach today. Rather than talking to some slides, I'm going to let you watch the slides, and you can listen to me or not, as you so desire. So Kate contacted me about talking about adapting your house effectively. And she said the title for the day, she gave me the title for the day, I talked through it with her, and I wrote it down here. But for me, my journey's probably been about 4 years of fixing up my house and thinking hard about how to remove the carbon footprint of my household as opposed to just my house. And I'm one of those people that has to persuade himself that doing something is worth it. Usually in terms of money through most of my life, but now I know a little bit more about the climate, I tend to think a lot more in terms of carbon. And so the things that I do, I cost them in terms of carbon as well as in terms of money. And so I thought I'd just start this talk today with a few statements. So to date, there's been zero progress on net zero. So that's where we stand at the moment, despite the fact we know what the words net zero mean. If you go and have a surf around on the web and look at how we're getting on with our carbon dioxide reduction on the planet, well, we haven't actually started yet. We're still making it worse every year. And that's perhaps not even our biggest problem. And in the last 4 or 5 years, I think I could fairly say that I know that neither aliens nor the government are going to come and land and fix up our houses. It's down to us, as in all humans, specifically us first world ones, to fix up our houses and also at the same time to change our lifestyle. Because when you start thinking about what you have to do to fix your house up, you have a lot of thoughts about lots of other things as well in the time that you spend persuading yourself to spend some of your hard-earned cash to actually do a fix on your house. And some of the things that you have to do can be very expensive. And I'm someone that always has to justify everything, especially when it comes to spending money. So I often say that I'm naturally tight. You know, I have been all through my life. And so I do have to really think hard. But the way I get around those really difficult decisions, the big money spending ones, is to think forward that if nobody does anything, then there'll come a point when the weather's that bad that so many people will move from where they grow food that it'll all get a bit busy, and then one day there won't be enough food in the supermarket and things will kind of finish fairly quickly for our complex society. And what that kind of means when you're contemplating spending more money than you want to on fixing something, it kind of helps me to say, well, when is it in time that you think that money's going to lose its value? So at some point in time, when there's no food in the shops, money's kind of irrelevant because we won't behave the way that we do at the moment. And so that kind of helps me, given where I put the stake in the ground for when that's going to happen. It helps me to put my money, my hand in my pocket, and actually to invest and spend on things which I really find difficult. So that's kind of how I weigh those two things up. So the purpose of today, and I think Kate, working for the council, has done a fantastic job, is to celebrate our natural world and create a positive vision of a sustainable future. So I felt I couldn't really start on this talk without really telling you where I've come from. So I'm pretty knowledgeable about the situation we're in on the planet. And because it's my birthday today, and I've been doing DIY for 45 years. And the first thing I did was take apart a sash window completely, put it back together again, and then stick it back in the wall. And I had no idea if I could do that. My dad just said, well, I'm busy, your room's cold, so you can do that if you like, and I'll help you if you want to. And when I got to the end of that, I discovered, and he discovered more importantly, that I could do stuff that was useful, and that was DIY. So either he set me to work for the rest of my life at home, or I set myself to work. And I just found that you can get on with stuff with some basic tools, take it slow, get a bit of advice, and things get done. So I think that's really the major message from this talk today, is that we have to put in the work ourselves to learn how to do stuff. And there's plenty of information out there. So today is a big resource of information for various things that you might want to do. But I've discovered there's an awful lot of information out there on the internet, but we have to put the work in ourselves to learn what it is that we need to do, why we need to do it, and then kind of how to do it. And I think I've also joined, in the last 4 or 5 years, with quite a set of environmentally or climate-aware groups and people who I never connected up with before in my previous sort of, normal standard life. But there's all sorts of experience out there in groups that you can join on Zooms, or you can go along in person to some of their meetings. And the depth and wealth of experience of people that you just come across is absolutely phenomenal. And if you set out as perhaps your secondary purpose in meeting groups with a question that you think someone can answer in that group, then you can go and talk to them, and a lot of the time you'll find super experts on any subject and any question. And it's pretty much the same with the internet. Whatever you want to ask, you can find out. And I'm a bit of a why person as well as a numbers person. And so I found it kind of joyous at my age in the last 5 years, so over 50, to actually start learning stuff again. So obviously I had a career in electronics and I was comfortable with that, and I went with that over 30 years. But learning about the natural environment, learning about how the weather works, how the climate works, why things are grim when it comes to our emissions and all that sort of stuff, really, really interesting. And it's a question of really finding the time and going out and learning and answering the questions that pop into your head. And it's the same for doing your house up as well. If you spot something in someone else's house and you go, well, why have they done that? You can answer your own question by having a surf on the internet. And if you're connected up to people, to networks of people, which I do recommend, then you'll find there's an expert on almost anything somewhere in there. They won't tell you about it necessarily. But if you start the conversation and talk around it, you can extract from people what it is that they know that they can help you with. It's true also for instructions as well. They're free on the internet. And webinars, you can watch videos of, say, how to change your double glazed units in your plastic UPVC windows. You can find a YouTube video on that. You can listen to webinars. You type in whatever you want to listen to, have a search through YouTube, and you'll find 3 or 4 offerings of what it is you're interested in. If you want to know how to build a bug hotel, just type it into YouTube, and you'll get 3 minutes, 10 minutes, or an hour and a half type of video. And that will give you an inspiration of some ideas. I often find stuff, I go, wow, I didn't think of that. And I've been doing stuff for like 45 years. Watching someone else do something and let them hearing how they think they've done it, and is really, really instructional. And there's also tons of DIY projects. So the list that I have that I put up on a website for this talk today is 30 things long that I've done over maybe 10 years on the house that I live in currently. And I didn't really want today to go through a list of everything that I've done, because it won't apply to everybody. So what you can do in your house with your family is probably different from what I've been able to do. And so going through a list of all the things that I've done doesn't really feel right to me, and it's kind of death by PowerPoint, as one of my good colleagues has mentioned before. So I decided instead that I'd put up a set of photos of some of the things that I've done, and that's what you're seeing through now. So one was upgrading. I had an open fire when I first moved into the house that I was at, and that's like 15% efficient, and it was so cold that it wouldn't heat the front room, let alone the rest of the house. And the radiators were all on tiny pipes, and the house just couldn't get cold, couldn't get it warm. And then I went to what you saw first, which was a wood burner inset. And that was probably 3 times better, but the house was still cold. And then, beginning of lockdown, I went to a sealed wood burner, which is what you saw me going through there. And that was basically 2 times the heat for 1/3 of the fuel. And it takes all the air from the outside and puts it into the fire, rather than dragging it through all the draft places in your house, across your feet and around your ears, to the fireplace, and then shooting the heat up the chimney. So that's what you're seeing there. And this set you're going through now is possibly a big project of me doing all of the work associated with putting a ground source heat pump in except for drilling the hole in the ground, and then the pipe that goes from the hole to the gubbins, and then the guts of the plumbing. So you're sort of seeing everything that was done whilst I was putting that in. But I think the other thing is, there is no recipe for everybody's house across the country. There's 20-odd million houses in the UK, and that tells me straight away that the people who own those houses, wherever possible, they have to do a lot of stuff themselves, because there isn't 22 million workers that can come around and fix up all of those houses in the next 10 years. They're just not there. So it's up to us, really, to get on with our jobs. But every house is different, and the optimum solution for anything, be that your windows, if you want to have solar, gardening, soil, ivy, anything that you want to talk about, where you live, it's going to be different to where everybody else lives. So there isn't a simple recipe. It's always dependent upon the house that you're actually living in. And the same is true of your household. So I live in a household with 2 adults, and that's very different to if you're living in a house with small children or babies or teenagers. You know, dare we say, they can be the worst. They don't necessarily think the way that you do, and so they won't play and act and live by the rules that you set yourself, but you still want to make a difference. And again, there's no answers. It's like, talk to people, think about it. You go, well, how can I get around what they do in a way that they'll do the right thing without really realizing it? And of course, the same is true for health. If you've got a bad back, you can't dig a soak away. Money. If you're finding it really, really hard, then you probably can't really necessarily even spend any money on anything at the moment. But there are other things that you can do, like activism and hassling the council, and just learning as a background activity, and actually thinking about the things that you do in the moment all the time. How can I do this better? How can I do this without using so much energy? How can I buy less plastic? How can I avoid pollution and energy and all those sorts of things? So even when you've got no money, there's things that you can still do. And actually doing all these things makes you feel better. So people's commitment varies hugely. But for me, I think whether you're like a DIYer, or whether you need to call on a bit of help from a friend to do some of the bits of a job that you might want to do, or if you're a professional, or a mix of all of those things, for me, the key is to find out the cost or the savings in terms of both money and carbon dioxide, and then list out all of those things. So I'm quite a listing person, so I'll think all the things I could do. Some of them are completely out the window at the time, you know, like buy an electric car. You go, how much? No chance. And you think, okay, so what about some PV panels? How much does that cost? 4 or 5K, okay. Have I got that? Can I get access to it? How long is it going to take to pay itself back? And you can write a long list of all of those things, and then you can actually order that list in the way that you value. So if you think that taking up some of your concrete in your garden and turning it into a flower bed to sequestrate carbon in the soil by growing things and bringing your soil back to life, that might be way more valuable to you than trying to keep your spare bedroom warm by putting double glazing in it. And it might actually have just as good effect. So it is very much about finding out what it is that you want to do, because you'll then have the energy to do it yourself. You won't feel someone's telling you to do it, or you have to do it. You're doing it because you want to do it. And then it's a question of searching around, listing things. So I tend to do a lot of this in Excel. Because I do a lot of reading, a lot of research, and then I say things in public and I publish things in public, I always have to be able to defend what I've said. And that means that I need to be able to have a hook somewhere to go back to the place that I've read it, and then to go back to the places that I also read to prove that what I read in the first place was actually right. So to persuade myself that what I've been told was correct. So I tend these days to store the hyperlinks from the web in an Excel spreadsheet as well, alongside a little comment to say what I got out of that hyperlink, and then the date that I actually read it. It's all trying to get hooks back to where I came from. And this applies just as much to all of my projects for doing up the house, such as retrofit underfloor heating. You know, you say that, and then you can't even remember, because it was 5 years ago, what company it was you went to. So I have these long lists in Excel, which you can do just as well by pen and paper if that's the way that you work. And it enables me to do something and then forget about it. And if it needs fixing or I need another one or someone wants to ask me about it, I've got some chance of going back and finding out why I thought and why I chose the way I did previously. And again, in terms of figuring out what you're going to do and how to do it, talking to people, you can email people as well. Oftentimes, hit the contact us page of somebody selling something or of a group that knows about things. Or if you've had a surf around and you find something interesting, just email them. The worst they're going to do is not reply to you. And the best they're going to do is teach you something that you didn't know or give you a pointer to somebody that can help. So I always try to buy or use refurbished stuff as well. So a recent project which you saw there, which was to insulate the room that the heat pump sat in, needed a pile of what is now very expensive stuff, which is rigid insulation board. And so I had a surf a few years ago because I had a bigger need to do lots of insulating. And I found a place that sold second-hand insulation. And I had to wait a month for a pantechnicon to come along and drop it all off. And I had 2 piles that were about 3 meters high of insulation board for the job I was going to do. And I was really surprised. It was a bit kind of dinked and a bit dirty, and it wasn't straight around the edges. But for the job that needed doing, it didn't matter. I could straighten it up and cover it over with a bit of aluminium foil in that case. And rather than causing something made out of oil and gas to be created from new, I was able to take something and give it a second life. And that's kind of how I always tend to operate. So can I find it on eBay? Can I find it on FreeCycle? Can I plan to do the job in 6 months' time and look out for stuff in skips like pallets or bits of wood or the various bits and pieces that I think I might be able to get a hold of without buying them? If I plan to do the job in 6 months' time, these are the bits and bobs I'll need. Which of those should I be able to get a hold of for free and kind of recycle or upcycle? And something I came across a couple of years ago was actually using eBay as a cupboard. So you go around your house and you pile up all the things which you're not going to use but you don't want to get rid of. You're going to do something with them one day. If you give those a second life by selling them to somebody who wants them on eBay, when you finally get around to it, you buy them back off of eBay. So not exactly the same one as you put on there, but another one. And it might be in a better color than the one you sold, or it might be in better condition. But the point is that eBay is like this great big cupboard that you can put stuff into, stuff that you're not wanting, that someone else might want. And then when you need something that's second-hand, you don't want to create a new one, you can buy it back out of eBay. And that seems to work quite well as an idea. And another thing that COVID kind of taught me, or it's taught everybody really, was the capability of listening into webinars on subjects which you'd normally have to travel to London or travel to Europe to listen in on. And lots of companies and institutions and groups are now connected up on the internet because they've realized so many more people actually listen to them when they're publicly there on the internet. And what it means is you don't actually have to go anywhere. You can either sit down and watch it live, or you can pick it up later and watch the webinar when you're doing the washing up or doing the ironing. You're actually doubling up the use of your time, and you're getting access to experts from around the world on subjects that you're interested in. And at the end of all of that, whatever subject you're thinking about, you actually end up being a bit of an expert. And when you're the expert, when you're in conversation with various other people in your groups, if you make them aware that you've done something, like fitted a heat pump, then they'll come to you as an expert and go, well, I'm thinking about doing that, but then you get a whole list of things that are negative, and then you're in a position to say, well, yeah, some of those applied to me, but overall it was the right thing to do, and here's how you get around those things. So I think learning and then doing puts you in a position of being an expert, and then you can actually share in order to help other people with some of their questions. So I started off by asking how much energy I used in my household. So CSE downstairs, they reckoned that every person, every adult, uses or emits 13 tons of carbon dioxide per year. So if there's 2 in your household, that's 26 tons. And my set of 10 solar panels, they save around about 1 ton. And there's 2 people living in my house. So a big set of gleaming solar panels is nowhere near the sort of offset that you need to do in order to get over the amount of emissions that you do in your household. So that's point number 1. Putting one thing up, it doesn't cut the mustard. It's, it's not there. So I actually sat down, again, I had a surf, and Google's very good at answering questions. So if you want to know how much carbon dioxide your gas created through last year, then you can have a look at your gas bill, toss it all up, they handily do it in kilowatt hours, and if kilowatt hours don't make any sense to you, which many numbers don't, just have a surf on the web. What's the kilowatt hour? Keep reading, have a read on Wiki, and after maybe an hour, some papers that I read, I have to read them 4 or 5 times, and it might take me 8 hours to understand what it's talking about. Those are the crazy papers. But I can only get through them because I spend a lot of time in every sentence finding out what it is that the academic's talking about, using Google, using Wikipedia, and keep trying until you understand what it means. And kilowatt hours is scary to a lot of people. But actually, if you spend half an hour finding out what a kilowatt hour is and relating that to your electricity bill, the penny will drop pretty quick. And most things that we buy, energy-wise, are actually there in kilowatt hours. So the electricity that you use is billed in kilowatt hours. In my case, the heat output, which is what I was interested in, as well as the carbon, most of this stuff is expressed in kilowatt hours. And you can start to apply your carbon emissions to everything: gas, electricity, oil, petrol, wood, clothes, food, water. And you can write a little list and write the numbers down and get an idea from your bills and a guess of how much of this stuff you use, which of the things that you consume in life are creating the most emissions. So that's where I came from, was in a carbon emissions viewpoint, because we all know they're expensive. And sometimes along the way, you keep asking the same question of Google, and it doesn't give you what you want to know. And the key there is to just kind of rephrase the question, just change it around a little bit if you're not getting the answer that you want. And when you do get some answers, it's like, don't believe everything you read in the newspaper. So when you get some answers on Google, you also have to use your brain to say, is what I'm reading right? Does it feel right? And can I check by reading someone else's article or someone else's paper, does it sound right? Are they disagreeing with each other? And then you make your own opinion from a set of information that you've learned. So you can actually validate the answers. And then I would probably also store any key recommendations. So if I'd spent an hour looking on the internet and found an answer at the end, I'd make jolly sure I wrote it down. Because sure as eggs is eggs, in 3 years' time, you can't remember where you found that page. And you can't remember where the number came from. So I tend to cost everything, both in carbon and money, when it comes to doing up the house. And you build up your knowledge and you get a feel for where your worst area is. And one of the most useful things that you can get is a smart meter. So I gently talk to people about smart meters, and some people think that they're like Big Brother coming into your house, and they can't ever tell you exactly why they think that, but they're totally against them. And I discovered 3 years ago that I could get all of the data that told me how much electricity I used for every hour of every day over the entire last year, and the same for my gas. And that was all being collected and fed into my bill by my smart meter automatically. And when I realized that was there, I downloaded it all and put it into a spreadsheet. And so I now know if I was I used it to figure out whether I should buy solar panels or not. Basically, by looking at how much energy I used during the day, I could get a rough idea from the amount of energy the solar panels should give me of how much they'd save me in electricity every year. And when I did that calculation, a little more beside, the payback for my standard 10-panel system was about 9 years. And so I fixed it, and I was really happy and really surprised at how it changed my behavior within my house. that I elected to do cooking when the sun shone, and so did my partner. And you'd put the washing machine on or the dishwasher on when the sun was shining, because the electricity's free. And so, yeah, it kind of really, it helps change the way you live when you've got some options. And now I've fitted various other bits and pieces through the house, like the heat pump and a hot water cylinder now, and got rid of the gas boiler. The payback period on the panels is now down to 4 years, because the prices have gone up, and because I'm better at using it, and because I've done more switching away from fossil fuels and onto electricity. Again, I had no idea that was going to happen when I put them in. 9 years was fine for me, but 4 years is incredible. And the most difficult thing that I've done was just to get an electric vehicle. And that brings it down even below 4 years, because everything after a certain point in the day, pretty much, if it's quite sunny, it just goes straight into the car and then gets used. You know, it's actually on a courier round, so rather than running a diesel, it's an electric car, and it works all day, 6 days a week, and so, you know, that's a massive saving there. And just on that, I actually got it wrong. So when I started, I thought that my old wood burner was the most carbon-intensive thing in my house, and because I'm learning from a standing start about 4 years ago, there's an awful lot to learn to do with climate and environment, an awful lot. And some of it is incredibly interesting. So you go down lots of interesting rabbit holes, and you have lots of thoughts that need answering. And but anyway, you kind of get there if you keep learning. And I really should have started with the car. So the solar panels save about a ton of carbon. Wood's the most carbon-intensive fuel that there is. And when you chop down a tree, you stop it from actually storing carbon. And they do lots of really bad things to the soil as well, and the life that lives in soil. So burning wood's actually not a very smart thing to do. Even though we're told that it's a good idea, it's actually the worst fuel you can possibly use, if you ignore particulates and that sort of stuff. And so whilst I started with the wood burner, I actually should have started with the car. It's because in my particular situation, and again, it's different for everybody. So my partner does a courier round, 55 miles a day, 6 days a week, 364 days a year, one would think. It's gig economy for you. 15,000 miles a year in a diesel, 2003. Okay, 35 miles per gallon, that's 11 tons of carbon. And my solar panels are saving 1 ton of carbon. And my wood burner, actually not using my wood burner, is about 6 tons. And I didn't realize, and I would probably say I'm fairly switched on now with climate and environment, it took me 3 years to answer the question, how much carbon does my car emit? And then be able to back that up with all of the real numbers that you can find when you actually go surfing. So I think it's also quite important from a very high level to say, where am I going to spend my effort or my money? Because everything's always limited, time, money, capability. What are the biggest things that I do that cause emissions? And just on that, you know, if your car is doing, say, 10 tons a year, and your holiday flight is 750 kilograms, that's 3/4 of a ton, then spend a lot of time thinking about how can I not use my car? That's where you need to start thinking, and you go, well, I'll fix that problem, and then I'll think about the holiday when I've done that one. Or you might say, that's just impossible, so I'll do the holiday whilst I carry on working out how to fix the car. And I think finding out the miles per gallon of your car is a really useful thing to do. So fill it up with petrol to the top, look at the mileage, drive around for as long as you want, note down any fuel that you put in there, and then at some point in time, when you've done a few miles, fill it back up to 100% again, look at the mileage, and then count all the amount of fuel that you've put in the car between those 2 times. So that's the amount of fuel you've used. And then look at the number of miles you've done. And the one number divided by the other is the number of miles that your car did per gallon or per litre. And then you can convert that into kilograms of carbon fairly easily. And again, a lot of the time, you can actually ask Google how many kilograms of carbon in 100 litres of petrol. and it will come straight back with the answer for you. So you don't always actually need to do any maths if you don't like maths or if you don't like numbers. Oftentimes, Google will actually do the calculation for you, which is quite interesting. So that kind of touches on, kind of get a feel for what it is that you're doing in terms of emissions. And it's the same for, it's not just driving around in your car, it's like the whole holistic thing of the work that you do. You know, if you're somebody who has to fly around the world all the time because that's your job, then toss it up and say, well, can I live with that? Should I maybe think about doing my work differently? Or perhaps maybe I should change job. And it's the same with leisure. If you're somebody who's totally into parachuting, then you might have a bit of an issue if you go up and down in an airplane 10 times in a weekend, which is not an unreasonable hobby. You know, I've seen people doing that from when I used to live in Haxton. And again, your holidays, they get a bad rep. You can get a view on how much that costs in terms of emissions. I think also your aspirations. So if you want to double the size of your house by building a massive extension, what does that mean in terms of emissions? What are you actually doing, and why do you want it in the context of where we are with the climate? And I think also, whatever you're doing, so to flip back to the other end, so if big money and high-powered jobs is not where you are, I think that, you know, you can live in the moment. So, you know, one example that springs to mind is the dishwasher. And I've got the opportunity to put the dishwasher on when it's nice low-carbon electricity and low cost. But I compiled a set of manuals for all of the household goods that I have and looked at the amount of electricity they used and the amount of water, for instance, for all the things that I did. And then over time you can think, well, can I do that better? So in terms of the dishwasher, you know, you work out how much electricity it takes to do a cycle, and that's heating up the water and spinning it around a bit. And then I worked out roughly how much water went down the plug hole, the cold stuff, until the hot water came on from my hot water tank to my hot tap, measured it with a cooking measuring jug. I thought, okay, that's interesting. I wonder how much water I used to do a normal wash. And it was about the same in a bowl as it was for the dishwasher. And I did the calculations on the cost of the hot water, and I thought, well, actually, it's better if I actually, rather than filling up the bowl full, I just put a little bit in there, and then wash each bit, and then rinse it with hot water. And by the end, I've got half a bowl of hot water, and I've only used half the water and half of the heat, electricity, and I've done the washing up. And you go, well, that's mad, because that's a waste of time. Why don't you just put it in the dishwasher? And I discovered that because I'm fortunate enough to have a tablet, I can actually pick a webinar or watch something interesting about environment or climate whilst I'm doing the washing up. And then when I've finished, instead of pouring it down the drain, I can actually go and pour it in the garden. So it fills up the water table, rather than going through the sewage system, and then when it all rains too much, it lands up in the river. So that's an example of where something really mundane, where the obvious thing is to do it in the dishwasher, because that's what we all aspire to. Actually, if you think about it, for no cost, you save yourself money, you educate yourself, and you do a better job all round without causing any waste, and you get to improve the soil in the garden because it eats all the bits at the bottom of the bowl. So very interesting. And again, you know, you go, well, you're mad. But actually, it's not that we all need to do something. We all need to do everything we can possibly think of, given the situation that we're in. And how our household runs is a great place to start, because we all know what we do, and it just takes a bit of thought to figure, how can I do this a little bit better? And also, when I'm out and about talking, I do a lot of talking, thoughts come to mind, and I was annoyed that I kept forgetting what it was I wanted to know. So I also tend to jot stuff down on a notepad. Sometimes I'll send myself a text, so I remember it. I've got a little app on my phone where I can jot stuff down. And it really helps me to kind of keep on learning. And I think the web address that we've got here, if you were to go and have a little look on that website, that actually is a list of about 30 things that I've done to my house. So they're kind of quite significant things. So one line would be fit ground source heat pump. Another line is fit rainwater harvesting system. And there's a couple of hyperlinks in each line that would point you to some of the most useful or interesting or important things that are related to that job. Like redoing your double glazing windows, you don't have to take all the plastic out so that it then gets incinerated in the incinerator and then make you a new set of plastic windows, which is what upgrading your windows means to most people. You can actually just take the glass bit out. You can go to Abbey Windows or Roman Glass, and with the size of your double glazed unit, and you go, how much for all of these? And it's just massively cheaper to just change the glass in your windows than it is to change the windows themselves. So that's the sort of hyperlink that I've got in the list that's on that web page there. And I think Zero Chippenham got some funding to do some sort of do-it-your house workshops, which I heard today. So I did one of those over in Malmesbury, and if it all works out, then I probably will just be here for Q&A, really, because everyone's got a different question. And that's really why I haven't stood here and told you what it is that you've got to do or what I've done. It's because everybody's different. And another thing, that if you're lucky enough to be up the high end of finance or wealth, and yet you're constrained by your roof. You can't put solar on, but you desperately wanted to. You can't put it in the garden. You can't put it on a carport. Then you could actually, you could invest perhaps in your children's houses. You could go, well, I'll tell you what, kids, I'll put solar on your house because I want to extend my solar estate. And I can't do it at home, but I really want to. So I'll pay for it, you use it, and I'm happy that I've done something. So for some people at one end of the scale, you actually don't have to restrict yourself to your own life. You can help. It's easiest when it's for those that are nearest and dearest to you, especially if it's children, you know. If you see that your kids are doing thousands of miles in a car and they'd love an EV, but they can't afford one, then you could focus there and try and help them help you. And so, yeah, and that's kind of a bit of a double give as well. That works quite well. So I've rabbited on as I do for about 40 minutes, and that's just the first page. So I won't go through the second one. The second page is actually is the methodology, and we've touched on a little bit of that as we've gone through. But we've got about 9 minutes left to fit to Kate's schedule, and I know she's got a question. But if anyone else has got any questions, then yeah, let's fire away. And if you don't, I'll go on then, Claire.
Well, I walk past your house, not quite every day, but every time I walk in now, and I always walk. And I'm impressed with what you've done and the information outside and all the rest of it. And my question is basically, if you were starting again from the beginning, what would you do differently?
So I think the first thing to do, house-wise, the first thing to do is to insulate. Because the primary thing about this climate stuff and the environmental stuff is to cut consumption. So all of us, we need to move towards a third world lifestyle voluntarily. We have to just stop buying and using as much stuff as we do. And when you insulate your house, particularly in the ceiling or the attic, you're actually removing a huge need to heat your house. And that saves you loads of money, and it basically just saves energy, and it actually makes people happier. And I believed in that so much, I went and sat in the road and said it a few times as well. So that's probably the first place to start. And if, again, it's such a difficult question because everybody's different. Say again, sorry? Yeah. So in my own defense, and this applies to many people, I didn't realize there was a problem with the climate or the environment until mid-2019. And I've been in my house doing it up for probably 10 or 11 years, and it's the 5th one I've done. And so I wouldn't have put it up there. I'd have put some hot water panels up there instead, next to the solar. And whilst I say the car I should have done first, I'd actually almost say the solar's as important because it completely changes your mindset and it gives you choice. So you don't have to be beholden to the electricity and gas company. if you've got choice to use your own energy rather than to buy theirs, which is interesting. But again, on the flip side of that, now, because I volunteer with Avon Needs Trees and I'm always talking to people, and there's a wealth of people. If you've got 10 people planting trees in your group in a day and you see 20 different groups, that's 200 people to talk to. And so I started off with basic questions like, why are we planting trees like this? Why are we doing this? What are these trees? How do we make them grow better? And from that, I read books about worms, that's Darwin's book. I read books about soil. I read books about insects. And so whilst I haven't done the calculations, because I've been busy with my head elsewhere, it may well be that if you've got a big garden, then stopping mowing and starting to plant wildflowers, starting to plant trees in your garden may, carbon-wise, be a way better thing to do than putting PV panels on. And that might be your thing. So it's just as a household rather than a house. And with your agency, when you take knowledge and you apply that to what you can do and what you like to do, and you change your goal from being wealthy to lengthening the runway we've got into our future for ourselves and our children, then there's all sorts of things that you can do. And it doesn't have to cost money. So I might have started in the garden. Plant a tree or two or several. Oh, well done. So yes, the thing about the ivy is that that's an insulator, weirdly, come to think of it. So front of my house faces nearly south, and I know it's going to be hot, and every year it's going to get a little bit hotter. And so I've planted ivy on the front of my house, having cut away the concrete on the front and planted lots of succulents and stuff. So where the concrete path met the wall of the house, I cut away 8 inches of that. Didn't really fill it with soil. I figured that the soil under the path would be ready to grow some stuff, because it's been under the path since 1976. So I bought some succulents, bunged them in there, put a little bit of stones on top. They've absolutely loved it. But the idea was to put something on the front of the house to shade the house from the sun. Like last year, this year, next year, the year after, it's all going to get hotter. So having ivy on the front provides a place for the insects to live and the little bugs. It will give me 5 degrees of shading. So between what the bricks would have been in the sun and what they will be when the ivy grows up there, that's 5 degrees lower, which keeps the house a little bit cooler. Sequestrates some carbon, uses the soil, makes the soil underneath the path happy, hopefully, bring a bit of life back down there. And then in the wintertime, when it's windy and cold, you get the same 5 degrees of insulation from the ivy. And I don't have to do anything. I just dig a hole, or wandered down the alley behind my house, took a cutting, went and learnt how to do a cutting, bought a little bit of rooting compound. Most of them worked, and I planted one of those in front of the house, and it's, after a year, it's up here and about that wide. And I decided that I would use the alley behind my house to do the same thing. So there's probably 20 meters long by 3 meters or 2 meters tall of grey cinder brick. And it's been like that for 50 years. And then there's tarmac, and then there's another wall opposite. Nothing living at all. So I thought, I'll tell you what, I'll go and get my core drill. I'll drill a hole in the pavement, which I did next to the wall in the alley. And I did that all the way down the back of the alley. Then I went and got some more clippings. And I went with my 4-year-old granddaughter, and we planted the cuttings together. So she knows how to do that now as well. And we went and planted them in all these little holes. And then a year and a half later, one of them's actually over the top of the wall. So the wall now is not grey. It's probably 20-30% green with ivy. And I also made some shelves out of old pallets that were knocking around. Took the nails out, got a saw, and then remade them into shelves. So I didn't buy anything or use anything. Put those up on the wall, and they now get, I haven't quite got off milk yet, I'm working on it. But if you buy a plastic package that's as big as possible, so you say you want to buy some milk, buy the biggest milk bottle that you can, then the ratio of product to packaging is as good as it can be. So I moved on to buying the biggest milks that I can. And when I've finished with them now, I chop them in half, fill them up with soil, which I actually get from the drain in the alley, and then often pop down to Wilko and buy 50 or whatever bulbs or seeds or something, plant them in the soil, put them on the shelf, and then leave them to the whim of the public. And after 3 years, I've actually managed to fill the entire set of shelves with things that are growing, using, well, I actually have some soy milk containers up there as well, so they've got soil in now from the alley, and they're all growing life in the soil and hopefully some plants. And occasionally people take them, and I hope they take them and do the same thing, or they take them and they grow and they enjoy them. And so, yeah, so whilst it's kind of a talk about houses, maybe that's what you came to hear, it isn't, it's your agency, it's your environment, it's your imagination, and it's your learning that get a result out of lots of things. And then you yourself grow at the same time. I've certainly grown. I shall shut up now. But yes, have a jot of that if you want to have a look at some things to do to your house. And yeah, best of luck. Enjoy it, I would say. It should be fun.